So as coaches, we're always seeking growth. We're always trying to get better. Books and podcasts, they're great, but they don't know your specific challenge in your moment. You need more. You need mentors in the trenches. That's why we're launching the Coach Gym, an online community designed for you. Get full access to all our online courses, hundreds of digital resources for team building and culture, plus step into a global community with direct access to myself, Nate Sanderson, and other experts through webinars and weekly office hours. Learning is a journey. We want you in on it. Join the Coach Gym today. Visit tocculture.com. That's tocculture.com. One of my favorite coaching stories is that of the New England Patriots and their comeback against the Atlanta Falcons in the 2017 Super Bowl. It's an incredible game where the Patriots were down 28-3, and I think a lot of people might be thinking, okay, someone had to give some sort of amazing speech there at halftime to turn that around. Like, anybody watching that game is like, what happened in that locker room? That they could come back and win that game. However, I listened to a podcast where the Patriots tight end, Martellus Bennett, actually talked about what happened at halftime. And he said, first off, that the Patriots had actually practiced at halftime. They literally practiced their structure for halftime in the week leading up to the game because it was a Super Bowl and the halftime was like 10 minutes longer, and they wanted to adjust properly. And secondly, now they're down huge in this game, but there's no blow-ups. There's no arguing or shouting or yelling by players or coaches. It was just business as usual. Players breaking off in their groups, discussing the game and the adjustments that needed to be made. Lastly, there was no inspirational speeches. I know, very disappointing. But in fact, all that was said at the end of the halftime was Julian Edelman, one of their receivers. He brought everyone together, and in a very calm voice, everybody put their hands in. All he said was, all right, folks, let's go make history. Patriots on 3. Like, that was the limit to the speech. Now, today's podcast episode with Eamon Devlin is going to give you a lot of great ideas on how to create a structure for an effective halftime like the Patriots. However, I am not saying that inspirational halftime speeches are not effective, right? We don't even really get into that in our conversation with Eamon, because unless I think if you have data on every single halftime of every game of a team, or, like to have all that data, I'm not sure you fully can capture the power of a coach or a player at halftime to their ability to help shift the mindset of players. Like, some speeches have definitely inspired, and maybe that inspiration was effective. I think we can all look back on our coaching experience or even playing experience and point to a few speeches that help to maybe shift that mindset and the thinking, the belief. However, if you only focus on giving inspirational speeches, you're going to be very limited in your effectiveness as a coach, because that's not what your team needs. That's not what the players need most days. So in part 2 of our conversation with Eamon, he's giving us some tools and structure for effective halftimes. For all the other 99.9% of the time, you don't need to be giving inspirational speeches. Now, depending on your level of athlete and sport, you're going to have to determine what works best for you. And I do know this, though. Coaching under 10 girls football, less is more, right? So say less, just like we talked about in last episode with Eamon. And secondly, the most consistent that I've experienced coaching even young girls, the more consistent I can be in my structure of asking questions and getting them to reflect and discussing, the more beneficial the halftime conversation goes. They get better at it, right? It's not something that's just like you implement and you see instant results. It's almost like a training them to be effective at the halftime as well. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nurbin, and I'm joined by my co-host, Betsy Butterick. The mission of this podcast is help you to become a better leader and build a better team culture. To get the notes to this in every episode of the podcast, all you have to do is subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox. It's the TOC Weekly Newsletter. And there's a link in the details of this episode. And you can also do so at tocculture.com. Also, check out Betsy's blog on Substack at Betsy Butterick.
Talk to me about, there's locker rooms where, let's say, a starter or one of the better players is maybe underperforming and they're upset about their performance. And so when they go in the locker room and it's just the player's time, they start railing on everybody else. So whether it's blaming people and saying, you need to do this, stuff like that. Or sometimes what I hear in locker rooms during player time is those that aren't playing feel a need to fill that space with their voice so that they are contributing in some way, so that they're being of value, so that they're relevant on the team, because they're not going to be playing in the competition. What advice do you have for coaches who are navigating either space? A player who hijacks the time because they're upset, even though they're one of typically the better performers on an off day, or people that are not playing, who I objectively say could have great insight because they're not actively in the game. Sometimes they can see more or offer a different perspective, but who feel the need to monopolize the time with their voice so that they stay relevant to the team.
I think there are two topics there, I think, if I may. One is who should be in the locker room at halftime. And the second one is player-on-player feedback. So I think that's the first question first, which is who should be in your locker. I think it's a very good question that any coach should consider. Like, does it make sense for the substitutes to be in the locker room? In my own little team, we actually disagree on this. My personal view is that the subs shouldn't be in the room, particularly in soccer, because we find that they're really pissed off, they're grumpy, they're not playing, and they're just highly distractive. And actually, in football, they normally don't say anything, but they have the kind of nervous. We look at the tapes, so they just look annoyed. And players don't need much to get distracted. Well, anybody doesn't need much, as to get distracted. So we thought, okay, let's just pull them out of the room, put them on the pitch. With some of our groups now, we have the assistant manager, and he or she speaks to the substitutes at halftime. So that gets one of the coaches out of the locker room. In some cases, that's a tick, by the way, because there's less voices, there's less people in the room. We're trying to get it. So that, I think, but you could argue also it makes sense to hear the message. So that's a question I think any coach should consider. Does it make sense to leave subs in or out? Player-on-player feedback is fascinating. So the first piece of research that I completed in Gaelic football, which was an elite level, players who'd won sort of the highest competition. The feedback that players most valued at halftime was generally feedback from fellow players, assuming that they respected the player. So let's say you and I are on the same pitch. I'm left back, you're right back. I'm having a terrible day. And you go, Eamon, what the hell's going on with you today? But in that moment, the research would suggest that, but I see you as a player. Like, we're in the same trench, we're in the same war together. If a coach comes in and starts saying, Devlin, what are you doing today? You haven't the game started 40 minutes ago. In that split second, I might think, well, what would you know? You haven't got any hair on top of your head. You're overweight. These things happen in a split second. And then it's not people don't really listen to what's said. So player-on-player feedback seems to be very valuable. The difficulty is we're seeing it becoming less and less common. Because as soon as the coach comes into the room, and I can't speak for every locker room, of course, of different sports, different cultures, but just broadly, the player-on-player stuff stops. Then becomes a lecture. Yeah, okay, some coaches are very good at, but it's still kind of a lecture, let's be honest. Mostly it's usually a lecture. In you would say elite teams, yeah, it's more of an interact, but it's still fairly one direction. If you look at the word count, who's saying what, it's usually about 95% coming from the coach to the players. In some cases, 100%. So in that situation where you think someone's, to be honest, you can't beat videoing this stuff, but I think it should all be videoed. I think there's safeguarding reasons why it should be videoed. Personally, I think halftime should be videoed, and obviously depending on who have access to it, certain people. But that way, if you have, instead of a senior game, because we mainly work with senior players, if it is videoed and somebody is behaving the way which you think is not, just show them the video. Go, look at this. This is what you did at halftime. You watch that. You come back to me tomorrow. We'll have a chat. So I think hopefully player then will be able to see after the sort of fire has gone down a bit. But broadly, player-on-player feedback with the analysis we run that's very powerful, actually.
When done well, yeah.
Yeah, but we find it generally works because it's the confident players, at least in maybe it's different when we get a male game. It's the confident ones who are actually playing well. You're the ones who generally speak up, or the more senior players. So yeah.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, even in the sport of basketball, at least here in the United States at the college level, it's like, if I told a coach, yeah, anyone who hasn't played in the game doesn't go into halftime, they'd be like, what are you talking about? Just it culturally and within sport, I appreciate the perspective you're offering, because I think this is an element of the game that a lot of us as coaches don't think about. We just do what we've always done. Of course, the whole team would come in. Why wouldn't they? we've never even considered that there could be a different option. So I think you're giving coaches a lot to consider, whether they make a shift or not, just being very intentional. Who's halftime for? That was one of the original questions that you offered. But also, who needs to be in the room? Who needs to be speaking or not speaking, and for what purpose? I'm even thinking about, if an assistant or associate head coach or even the head coach had a few notes for halftime, and as the team transitions into halftime, they pass that note to the player, like focus the conversation, what you have as players around these points, and then I'll come in and I'll support you, to really give that ownership of the locker room to the players and elevate the voice of the leaders. Just so many different considerations that I think largely go unaddressed or unthought about because it's simply a necessary break in the action. And so we fill it with whatever's needed in the moment. But I'm very curious how many people are listening that have really thought about the structure of their halftime, the purpose of their halftime, how they facilitate halftime, how are they training in their training sessions, preparation for conversations that they ideally want to have at halftime. So I think this is just a really fascinating element of competition to consider.
And asking players as well. We also, like, to be honest, when we are asked to redesign a halftime, we insist that some players are involved. Because if you boil down and kind of our ethos is like, we think halftime's for players, basically. Like in one line, we think it's for players. Okay, if that's our thesis, then let's build up. We think makes the players better, or at least not make it worse in the second term of the game. So having players involved in the design of that process is, I mean, to give you an example, Clive Woodward, who was a really famous rugby coach, managed England to the World Cup. We interviewed him about a year ago. 2 years before they won the World Cup, they saw the performance in the third quarter dropping, and then he had his light bulb moment, realizing, oh, why is this happening? Oh, halftime happens before the third quarter. So he got 3 of his players, including Martin Johnson, all of his backroom team, all of his staff, give them 2 days and go, right, you've got 2 days to go and think about halftime, blank piece of paper, 900 seconds. How do we fill? Ignore what we do now. Like today doesn't happen. Like yesterday didn't happen. We've got a brand new. This is our team. We're going to design a team that works, and that's you completely redesigned it. And and frankly, that paper will probably look different for every coach listening to this. And I can't say what's right or wrong. Just the question people maybe want to think about, and involving the players.
I love that directive of like, it's for the players. It's for the players, having a clear purpose, setting to guide that structure. What you're talking about there, what Betsy's referencing too, I think comes down to some of the work that we do too around culture, which is there's really maybe 2 different types of coaches when it comes to these types of conversations. There's the ones that say, they answer the question, why have we always done it this way?
Mm-hmm.
And then they're just looking for reasons that we've always done it this way. And then there's coaches that are listening to this podcast, largely, they're going, what if we did it differently? Like, what might be a better way of doing it, And I love this blank slate thing, blank piece of paper you've given us. If I was to start to engage players, right, I think one of the best ways to do that, and you can tell me if you disagree, but is one of the best ways to do that is to put them in groups to have conversations or a whole team and give them questions, like giving them questions to have those conversations. So if you're doing that, what are some of the best questions to give them to reflect on together?
We generally do it by initially an anonymous survey, first of all. Like, rate your team's halftime for you today out of 10. If it's below 5, then why is it below 5? Magic 1, what would you change about halftime? What do you want to get out of halftime? Like, so, what else do we ask? What sort of halftime do you feel most comfortable in? Like, when you're 10 points up or 10 points down, what frustrations you have? What does Coach Betsy do that impresses you? Or the other side of the coin, and then using that, and then same time asking the coaches, tell me what you want to achieve at halftime. Tell me what your goals are, and then we go away and look at the tapes and go, okay, well, we'll look at what you do, because this is what you told me what you want to do. We'll then get a little team and go, well, okay, you want to achieve this, but is that really happening? So it's fascinating. We look at, so I just this morning, we're doing a session with some of the England sort of pro licensed coaches again in 2 weeks' time, and I sent them I sent them a survey of, rate your own half times. And, the scoring looks pretty high. Now, we've got a backlog of feedback from players, professional players, what you think half time is like from standards. And they're not the same. Yeah. So there's something's going wrong. It's like, players are saying broadly 2 out of 5, 1 out of 5. Some coaches are saying like it's between 3 and 5. So there's a bit of a mismatch here. Coaches are generally overestimating their own effectiveness.
Yeah.
And maybe it's different in gender, but just broadly in just broad numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love how you answer that question, because you talk about co-creating this, and starting to get your players' feedback. And it's not that the coach sits down with the blank sheet. It's like, hey, let's have a conversation with our players and stuff like that. I was actually asking, though, in my question, let's say you take 5 minutes of halftime and you say, all right, I'm going to give this for you all players to have a conversation with each other.
Mm-hmm.
You could just say, hey, go have a conversation, but I often find it's very helpful to give them some questions, to simply, it could be, what happened? What do we got to improve? Whatever it is. What do you feel are maybe some great questions to give players at halftime to reflect on and start to have, an effective review? Do you have those that you give or recommend?
It depends on where, going back to, because what we do a full sort of what we call the noticing period of the work. It's like just noticing what happens, just reviewing, just being spies effectively, just trying to understand what happens, to try and work out where this control level is. Again, not everyone agrees that level of control, or let's call it support if you're being more kind towards coaches. So let's say you've got a very, let's call it quiet group, which is becoming very common, by the way. We're seeing it really in, even some of our Prem clients, because you've got language barriers too, right? Like Brighton Football Club has now got 21 nationalities in its locker room, 15 native languages. In our little business, it's a record, actually. And we think it might even be a world record. I don't know, because none of our US clients have anything like that level of diversity in the locker room. 21. So one I think, so it could be, so I'm going to give you a scale, JP. One is, let's say a very quiet group who just don't feel like talking up. We find a good entry question is, which player, what number in the opposition is causing us most damage today? Generally, people have got a view on that. Yeah, it's number 7 because X and Y. Okay, well, what are they doing exactly to cause us headaches? Well, they're making runs, but okay, but what? So what though? How do we kind of counteract that? So that can be something else we tried with a team recently. I don't know if actually they did it in the end. Was we recommended to get the talking about substitutes. Is in the substitutes bench again? They're very quiet. We thought it was a bit of a waste of resources. All these players lined up, looking annoyed. So they have an iPad, and they actually vote on what's the most important thing to be discussed at halftime. So is it formation? Is it intensity? Is it defense shape? Whatever it is. So when the players come in at halftime, and in this case even the subs, on the screen is the results, and say it's like 50% will say talk about structure of the defense. That's what. At least then there's something on for the players to go, well, either to go, yeah, I agree with that, or not to agree with that. Depending on what you're. So that's a way of what we call trying to bridge the gap between management and players. Try to bring these two elements slightly close together. A higher level than that is a slight amendment to that is you can also have that iPad in the locker room for the players themselves. It's passed around and they just vote on what the halftime team talk should be about. So, and that way you're getting feedback. The coach is getting feedback from the players, and what we find is slightly better listening and focus, because the coach is talking about something that the players have asked them to talk about. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect, maybe people's minds drift off, but we're seeing slightly better, also execute. So, because we count if you give a halftime team talk, we actually then check were these changes executed in the second half. That's the ultimate level of checking impact. Like, did the players follow my message, and did they do it well on the pitch? Then another level up from that is JP. It's a very long answer, isn't it? Is a framework like stop, start, continue, which we've used a lot. So you know, in the second half, what do we stop doing? In the second half, what do we start doing? In the second half, so that's yeah. So there's different levels. But the one we see a lot, players or coaches use the players like, how does it feel? I personally don't like that question for the if you walk into a room and go, hey guys, how does it feel? You might get 3 answers back. But someone might talk about the referee, someone might talk about somebody in the crowd, someone might talk about the court. It's very hard for the coach to kind of link that together into some kind of like, you know, message which he or she has listened to the players. So I find that very too wide of a question personally. Whereas you give them a framework like that, stop, start, continue, or what's going great, what could be done better. I think having, yeah, that, but it needs to be trained and training as well, JP. The
I
stuff
just
needs
really
to be
like
done.
just what do we need to talk about? I just like that is the first great question, and that's a really
Yeah,
hard one. Of like we only have like 5 minutes here, 10 minutes, so that's a
yeah.
great one. In all of this, Eamon, there's really one very important factor that we've yet to discuss, which I think is probably the most critical factor to all this, which is the coach themselves. You've mentioned the coach, you know, taking 30 seconds themselves to kind of ground themselves, to center themselves, so that they can really show up with intention, be emotionally intelligent in that situation. Like if a coach is stepping in at halftime and they're pissed off and their heart rate's through the roof and they're emotionally dysregulated, you know, the chances of them having the right intention and message, and being able to, you know, be what the team needs or pull the right tool out of the toolbox is very, I think, you know, low, you know. And honestly, at the end of the day, like a coach could blow up on his team. And my whole thing is, I would argue maybe that's not the best way to go about things. However, I'm more interested, is the coach actually intentional to do that, or are they just letting, you know, blown off steam? Like, and that's what the coach needed. He needed to get all the things off his chest. And if it does work, if it really does feel good to get all those things off your chest, imagine what that would be like for your players to be able to just get things off their chest. But anyways, I'm back to this question here, which is, you know, when you think about leaders, the best leaders at halftime, you know, how are they showing up in that space, and what are they doing to make sure they show up for the players?
They've got a really big array of how they perform. Like, you know, I will say the really
Each
good ones.
individually, or do you just seen a wide variety of different ways that
I think yeah, I think the best coaches at halftime are the ones who have got great variety to the performance. We've got you know, you never, you know, we go in, I'm wondering what the coach is going to do today. I'm like, oh, this is going to be a bit of excitement. I'm not saying it's a stage all the time, but there's a level of anticipation. You know, we're not quite sure what's going to happen. So, you might need to get people's attention, right? I mean, if you look at you know, you're playing in a game of, you know, we're off to Dublin in 2 days' time to you know, work with the Argentinian rugby team, and they're, you know, playing the British Lions. It's a friendly game, but a reasonably high profile game. I think the really good coaches, yeah, that they find a way of doing what's needed in the moment. And that means they've got various different sort of ways of doing it. So I'll give you 3 examples, if I may. You know, one is just, you know, let's say you come back, your team is 2-0 down, or it's not performing very well, or you might just think they're just frankly a bit lazy today. That does happen, or the energy levels are very low. You know, just not walking into the dressing room could be an idea. Just, you know, that's delivering a message by saying nothing. That takes a strong coach to do that. Another one is storytelling, or actually I've now started calling it imagery, because people don't like this. I find some coaches get scared by calling it storytelling, but just some imagery. So I'll try one very quickly, if I may. You can edit this out, by the way, if it's rubbish. So let's say, you know, basketball game, you're down 18 points, you know, championship final. And you give your players a few minutes. You're hot red favorites for this game. You just lost your best player for, you know, excessive fouling. Who also takes most of your three-point shots. So your odds winning this game are pretty low. You walk into the locker room and go, some of you think this game is lost. To be frank with you, players, I think we've lost the game. We've left too many meters to climb in that mountain. But that's okay. There'll be other finals. There'll be other championship finals. Maybe they'll involve us. Maybe they won't be. But for some reason, none of us in this room, including myself, turned up today. So I'm now looking forward to seeing how you perform in the second half to see what character you are. Because knowing your character is more important, I can promise you, than the result of this game. So now you're going to decide as individuals, I can't do it for you. You're going to decide how you lose this game. Are you going to lose by more, or are you going to close the gap? I look forward to seeing what choice you make in the second half. I have nothing more to say to you. So that's a different way of doing it. Some people like it, some people don't like it, but it's a way of trying to get people to imagine something for themselves and make a decision for, instead of trying to control them, you're trying to give them a choice.
You're highlighting that choice, and that I'm ready to go actually play a game right now. I'm ready to go play the second half. You got me pumped up, Eamon. It works.
And it's not, God, if I can do it. I mean, because I don't think I'm not saying you need to do this stuff every week, but it's just having that, and I've seen coaches do that kind of stuff really well. They just know instinctively, and I'm sure I know myself, by the way, but I think they know what their team need. And also, they're really good at they're really good at physical contact. They know when Becky needs a hug. And it might involve no words. There's one coach in rugby I work with, and often his word count's very low. Actually, it's very low. But occasionally, he just knows when to, that part, like a really strong, good eye contact, what I call eye color, and looking at your eyes. I've clocked your eye color, hug, no words, and maybe is that more powerful than giving that player a 3-minute one-on-one on what you should do when you get the ball under the hoop.
I like how you brought that up, though, because I think this is my one other big question before I kind of let you get out the door here today, which is the thing that drives me the craziest is, and I've done it a million times, but as a head coach, I give my spiel and then I turn to my assistant coaches. Anything else? And then we go down the line, right? Why do I do this? Maybe because I think they might see something that I didn't see, but the players aren't listening at this point. I'm imagining your research would show that if they struggle to remember what the head coach says, they really struggle to understand what, coach number 3 says. But we do this because we want them to feel like they have a voice, they feel valued, right? So, I saw by your body language there, you tend to agree that's not the best way to go about things based on our conversation. So what is the value of an assistant coach at halftime? If they're going to be in the room and I'm an assistant coach, am I going out, I'm giving hugs? What else am I doing? What are some other things that we can do as assistant coaches?
Well, we had a situation recently with the Gaelic team, and to be honest, the assistant coach just wouldn't shut up, to be blunt. He was just over speaking over the head coach. The guy spoke well, by the way. He's a very smart guy. He talks, but the message was just getting. It was. I don't think it was landing that well with the players. So we would design this system. We have the subs outside, and so we don't know who it is now. Listen to this. And then his job is to kind of give a mini talk to the substitutes. But there's a serious role, though, right? Giving some time and attention to the substitutes. Maybe different in basketball, right, where people come and going all the time. I get the bin, sort of more, sort of larger, call it invasion game sports, where you might probably couldn't come on in the second half. I think 3 things I would say if I'm male assistant coaches. 1, ideally don't stand next to the head coach. It's just an extra distraction. It's very hard for someone to be very blank, I've realized, unless you're an actor. Because generally, if I'm speaking and say, JP, you're the assistant coach, there's a good chance whenever I say, you're thinking, I don't agree with that even. It's very hard to hide people's, I'm not sure what I said it that way, or we didn't agree that. So you're kind of giving away. Then the players are thinking, well, these two don't get on, and then that becomes the brain exercise. Is there some, that becomes more fun than listening to the tactical stuff. So we say just don't stand next to whoever the person speaking. Stand, sit with the players. Secondly, I think the best time for the assistant coaches is in that coach time before you go into the locker room. Is helping the coach narrow the message down to, and I say it's very down to a 5-year-old simplicity. like literally an alien coming into this dressing room who never played this sport could understand what this coach is all about. Because that way you've the higher odds of people understanding what they're doing and what they're going to do. And people go, that's very basic. But as we probably know, the real geniuses of people stuff make it really, really, really straightforward because they can. Because anyone can make it complicated. Anyone can. And then the third thing with the coach is with the player is, so the assistant manager is sit with the players and just look around and go, like, who needs who's my support? So in our reviews of the scoring system of how teams do in pre-game and halftime, to be honest, if a player comes to us with a question, that gets quite a big uptake in our system, our scoring, because that shows that the coach. So the analogy I was going to use is a really good assistant coach should be a waiter. Like, let's say you both are in a nice restaurant, right, in US or Dublin. Like, in a really good restaurant, the really good waiters you don't notice. As soon as you want your wine filled up, someone just comes in and fills it up, and they disappear out of your eye line. Like when you get to your pudding or dessert, they come on the menu, right? So they come when you need them. They're not always there, kind of like, trying to give you support or I think we're kind of crowding players. I think a bit. We're smothering them a little bit. And that's a very broad statement in different sports. The last thing I'll probably say in this point, if I may, is there's a coach who I follow very closely, a guy called Andy Friend. He's a coach in Australia. And he once taught me something, which is, I'm not everyone agrees with this, but his line is, the more you say to a player on game day, the more you're telling him or her you can't do it. Now, not everyone agrees with that, but that is something I've taken on board. Because even if, like, I'm saying to Betsy, you're going to smash it today, you're wonderful, you try, like, well, but why did I didn't say anything to JP. Like, is the subtext that I think you needed my support today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then,
yeah, I love that. It doesn't mean we don't ever offer words of encouragement, but gosh, how many times have I even like the thing of, it really speaks to like executive or leadership coaching, which Betsy and I is our craft, it's our work, and recognizing that the people that we're working with, the leaders that we're working with, that they're well capable to do the work themselves. We're just there to help to facilitate their reflection, their learning, their growth. And the more that I'm telling, the more that I'm having to give that coach, the more I'm telling them that they couldn't figure that out themselves. And that's the beauty of just holding space and listening and asking questions and helping leaders to work through that. So
there is, if I may, you talk about emotional regulation about coaches and look, I get it. Look, these are high-stake games. People a lot on the line. Maybe the players haven't followed your. So it's very easy to kind of read this stuff, isn't it? In a nice sort of Zoom call or interview. And something I learned from one of the England coaches, a guy called Greg Lincoln, is before he speaks to his players at any sort of team meeting or pre-game or intermission, he opens his phone and he gets out a picture. And this is one of my daughters. He gets a picture of his family and goes, right, well, that's Nancy. She was like 4 years old at the time. Spends 5 seconds just looking and going, those are my motivators in life. That's, to be frank,
that
that's
anchors
really,
him.
that's really important. This is number one. Everything else is, So I just think that's another way of emotion regulation is we've had we've had things, everyone from one manager clips his nails halftime. He's a ritual in a bin. He doesn't do it on the floor, but he's a ritual. Just clips his nails very slip. He's got quite short nails. But that's his way of the clicks, or his way of like just clicking back into. Somebody else has another one I thought which is hand gel, like very strong smelling alcohol hand gel. I'd recommend you. I tried it myself actually. It's actually surprisingly, because the smell does something to, I don't know, make you feel better about yourself. That's what I thought I did one day as a coach at halftime.
It's because it smells like tequila, and now you're just transported to like a
It's how
different.
it is.
It's
Maybe,
just alcohol.
Whatever it takes, right? Whatever it takes. But that did help me, I have to say. It's like suddenly, and then the last thing I'll say on that is what our research will also suggest is we found this on my side that the eyes are, if you're speaking to players and you're only using your verbal communication, the eyes are a real problem because we're always looking for what's going on. We're looking for danger, So we were just trialing with a team now when they wear sunglasses at halftime, quite deep, dark sunglasses, to try to dim the power of the eyes. Because if you are just speaking with your words, and it shouldn't really matter what I'm wearing, but if your full glaze are there and your assistant coach is next to you, if you ask them what they'll remember what you wore and what the assistant coach is doing and what he's doing with his hands. And so they're, okay, well, how do you dim the eyes? So like somehow dimming the eyes somehow may help attention spans or levels of comprehension.
Very cool. I mean, all the things, the level of intentionality. It's been an honor to have you on here and unpack these things. And where should our listeners go if they want to reach out to you and learn more about how you might be able to help them out?
Well, if they want to hear more, they may not, of course, then we had enough fun at this stage. Yeah, so the main is LinkedIn, actually, for the main. I tried Twitter, but wasn't very good at it, so I'll give that up. My daughter, Nancy, runs my Instagram account. So if you want anything funny, go on that one. Yeah, probably LinkedIn's probably the main thing. But yeah, I wish who's halftime forward is probably my best question.
All right, folks, that's it for today's episode. Huge thanks to Eamon Devlin. All the details to check him out, learn more about him, are in the details of this episode, as well as in our coaching notes, right? Definitely check out our coaching notes from the podcast, because we don't just take out the best things that Eamon said, but we help to put together an action plan of some items that you might consider and how you might implement them. So how do you get the notes? Well, that's easy. You just subscribe to the Weekly Culture Toolbox, and you do that at tocculture.com. Thanks again for listening. Please be sure to leave us a review and share this episode if you found it valuable.